Hey everyone, this is Dr. Nicole here. I am jumping on for our last Q&A of our video series. So for those of you who did not watch the video, the last video in our series was about the brain and emotions and how that really ties into our health and well-being. So feel free to stay in and tune in with us right now and ask questions as we go, even if you have not watched the video, because I am going to give a recap. But we will have the link to the video in the comments for those of you who have not watched it and would like to watch it. I'm going to let the dog in because he is scratching at my door. Give me a second. Come on in, buddy. He was just going to do that for another 20 minutes, so I figured I'd go let him in. So again, thank you guys for joining us. For those of you that have not watched the video, feel free to stay with us because we will be going into an overview, and then I am going to go through some pre-submitted questions about the video. But for those of you just tuning in now, please feel free to leave comments and ask questions as we go. I'm happy to answer them on the spot. So the last video of our series, we have really kind of dove into more of the other layers of our chronic symptoms that are not always talked about and not always really even considered to be a player in our health and well-being. And really what that comes down to is neurological function being considered in this epidemic of chronic illness that a lot of us are dealing with, but also looking at if there is emotional ties to the things that we are experiencing. And one of the examples that I gave in the video is how there are actually certain chakras, which are energy centers in the body, that actually tie into specific organs, but then also tie into very specific emotions. So as an example, the thyroid is one of your chakras. It's actually your throat chakra. And this has a lot to do with having physical manifestations, if that means it's hyperthyroid, hypothyroid, that actually can be connected to not speaking up, not speaking your truth. And this is not meaning that you're not, a loud person, you're not outgoing. It doesn't mean any of that. It means that there could have been a part of your life that maybe you didn't agree with someone. Maybe you didn't agree with how you were, certain ways you were brought up, or maybe you were forced to be a really good student, but you actually cared more about sports and you didn't speak up because you were kind of doing what you were supposed to do, or doing what was expected of you by society. These are things that can actually manifest physically later on in life. And this can actually appear as a compromised thyroid on blood work, but it actually has more of an emotional connection. So maybe you go on medication or you take supplements or you change your diet, but nothing is changing about your thyroid levels. And this, again, can be due to the fact that the core root actually is tied more to this emotional component. So if you can see, the dog is now trying to get out. So let me let him out. You're driving me crazy. Go ahead. This is what I do all day. Okay, so going to some of the questions, and also too, for those of you that are maybe more interested in how the emotional layers can really play a role in our physical health, there's this really interesting book by Louise Hay, and it's called You Can Heal Your Life. And this is actually goes through a variety of different physical manifestations and physical symptoms that are tied to very, very specific emotions. And even another example is I have many people that I work with that deal with hives, and they deal with histamine intolerances, or they just have itchy skin in general. And this is always presumed to be food-based or an allergy or something that they're doing wrong. And there is actually a huge tie to hives being associated with shame and guilt. And it's very interesting because one of our mentors, Dr. DeMartini, it's been very interesting to watch him in action because he does something called the DeMartini method, which is actually what Dr. Nick is doing right now. That's why he's not joining us. But the DeMartini method breaks down collapses specific emotional charges that can be associated with these physical manifestations that we have. And this is very interesting because watching Dr. Demartini probe and ask the right questions in the last seminar that I was with him, he had a woman who said, you know, well, what about hives? And he said, hives are typically associated with shame and guilt. And she was like, well, I didn't have shame and guilt at the time when this first happened. She goes, I remember exactly what happened and the time and where I was, etc. So she actually continued to describe that she was very elated at the time that her hives started because she actually won a competition for ice skating. And as he probed and asked more questions, what it turned out was that she was very proud at that moment because she won, but at the same time, her best friend that they competed together, she beat out her best friend. And she had a lot of shame around this, and that was actually the trigger for the hives. So it's not always these things that are extremely black and white, and sometimes it takes the probing and asking the right questions in order to figure out, is there, you know, this emotional layer, how did it start, where did it come from? So getting into some of the questions that were submitted and elaborating on this further, is after an emotion is cleared, can physical symptoms resolve quickly? And the answer is yes. We have definitely worked with people that we have used different methods to decipher if their layers or their symptoms are associated with emotions, and going through those layers, realizing that this was, there was an emotional root, being able to work through that and use the Demartini method in order to collapse the emotional charges around it actually created changes in their physical symptoms almost immediately. And this doesn't happen with everyone. It's really more so if you've tried everything else. You've actually, you've worked on the organ systems, you've done supplements, you've done medication, you've done therapy, you've done all of these things, and none of them have necessarily worked, is really when you have to dig a little bit deeper and decipher, is there an emotional layer here that needs to be worked on, that needs to be cleared? And at the end of the day, this is not to make you uncomfortable or get you outside the box or make you feel blame of any sort. I always tell people, we all got stuff. We've all dealt with a loss. We've dealt with a tough situation. We've dealt with stress. So this is not necessarily, pointing blame or making you feel badly about how you coped with a situation. It's just acknowledging that those layers could be there and helping to work on them, because sometimes it could be a really long road when we're dealing with hive outbreaks and we're just blaming it on food, and then we're deciphering and eliminating, and it gets to we're just eating 5 different foods and we're still having the hives and we're driving ourselves completely bonkers. It's time to look elsewhere and decide, is there another layer to this? So my next question is, do we have emotional issues that manifested into physical symptoms? Or do we all have emotional issues that have manifested into physical symptoms? And that's a tough question to answer. Like I said, we all have things. We all have things that we have dealt with that have been difficult in our lives. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're holding space for all of those emotions. But if you are someone who struggles with depression, or you struggle with anxiety, or you just feel worried all the time, and you just constantly find yourself being in a fear-based mode, you might be holding things, and you might need to peel away those layers in order to resolve those emotions. There are therapies out there, and we offer them, fortunately, here at IWG, and we do different work on the brain, and we have something called neurofeedback, which really helps to rebalance the brain and create better connections, balance out brain waves to help us sleep, really help to down-regulate some of those stress centers. So those are things that are available and things that can really help to balance the brain. But sometimes when in a specific scenario or an experience is extremely traumatic. And even if somebody brings it up, it's an immediate trigger. Sometimes we do have to withdraw that in order to release it. And just kind of piggybacking off of that is the most typical therapies that exist out there are talk therapies. And talk therapies serve their purpose, but sometimes talking over and over about a specific situation can actually strengthen it and make it have a bigger hold on you, because you're kind of telling the story over and over again. So the method that we use here, called the DeMartini method, really helps to see full circle every single aspect of a situation that is perceived as bad or negative or traumatic. You know, it really helps you to see this 360 view in order to see the good, the bad, see the good and the bad of the people that were involved, and also see how other people potentially came into your life, or other things presented themselves in order to push you in the direction of where your life is going, or how those things actually benefited you. Those are not always the easiest things to see. And when you use the method, it actually creates clarity around all different aspects, because everything serves a purpose in our path, and it's not always easy to see that. So that's really what the method allows us to do, is to provide different perspective on it. So one of the other questions, so I just briefly mentioned the neurofeedback. So just to clarify for those of you listening that are not really sure what that even means, some of you may have heard of something called an EEG, which is a way to use electrodes on the brain in order to decipher, you know, is there abnormal activity? There is something else called a quantitative EEG, and a quantitative EEG actually uses electrodes in the same fashion, but it looks at the brain more in depth. It actually maps out what is working, what is not working, what parts of the brain are overactive, what parts of the brain are underactive, how that ties to behaviors, how it ties to emotions, how it ties to our coping mechanisms. And it also evaluates your brain waves, which actually has a lot to do with your energy levels, and it has a lot to do with your sleep cycles. So it gives you literally a map of how your brain is working. And it ties it to very specific behavioral patterns as well. So from there, you can actually utilize this map to decipher what parts of the brain need improvement. And that's what the neurofeedback does, is it actually takes the parts of the brain that need the support, that need to be balanced, and it uses this technology using sound and light in order to reprogram the brain to work more optimally. So for those of you listening that deal with anxiety, you deal with sleep issues, you're dealing with bipolar, fatigue, you're dealing with depression, you don't have to. And I think this is just so important, because we live in a model that we just medicate for it. And I know that that is easy, and sometimes it's necessary because of the state that we're in. If we're in a bad enough state, that is needed short term. But when it comes to really fixing the brain, there's not many modalities that exist. And they are out there, and I'm very fortunate that we have it here at IWG, but you can fix your brain. You can get it functioning more optimally. You don't have to live in that state of fear. You don't have to have the panic attacks. You don't have to feel low and blame it on the weather and blame it on your hormones. You don't have to feel like that. And honestly, I would say for myself, going through the process, I didn't know that I didn't feel well. I didn't know that I had brain fog. I didn't know that I actually was kind of depressed. Like, I didn't know. It was my normal. I just felt like that on a daily basis. And I'm a Jersey girl. I powered through. I just made it work. I was like, this is, nothing's going to stop me. I'm just going to keep moving. I'm going to keep doing it. And it was just very eye-opening when, first of all, I saw my brain map, and then I actually started to work on that, and being able to just feel good, feel clear, feel energetic, feel like my mood is stable, just feel like I'm going into situations, coping with them in a completely different way. So, I just think that this is so important because like I said before, is we're all walking around feeling a certain way, but it's our normal. So we don't know any different. We don't know if we can feel better. And we don't really know many of the things that exist to improve our mood and our brain other than medication. So just know that these modalities exist and they are out there. And one of the other questions that was put down was, what are the success rates of, neurofeedback and QEEGs? And one of the important things for people to understand is the neurofeedback that is done to balance out the brain, the changes are permanent. And I think that this is very rare that we can say this in this field of healthcare, medicine, functional medicine, whatever you want to call it. You can't really guarantee that anything's going to be permanent because there's so many variables. But this is a therapy that is proven to create permanent changes. And the only thing that would really change that is if you had a head injury or you had a very significant emotional trauma that happened after the therapy. So I think that this is really, really significant because you can make vast but permanent changes to the brain in a very positive way. So another question here is, does a person have to have a traumatic event for the foundational cause of their symptoms to be neurological? And I thought this is a really, really good question to end on because no, you don't. You don't have to have a traumatic head injury or a traumatic emotional trauma. You don't have to have something extremely significant to create changes in your brain. You can actually have changes in your brain based off of your gut physiology. If you have bad bacteria in your gut or you have a lack of probiotics, that can alter your brain. Many people don't know 90% of your neurotransmitters, serotonin included, which is the primary hormone that is targeted for people with depression, 90% of your serotonin is made in your gut. So sometimes that actually is not just the brain. The brain is being affected, but it's actually your gut physiology, which has so much to do with your mood. And I think this is just so important for people to understand because a long-standing gut issue can actually affect your brain. You probably will still need to balance out your brain, but you also will need to make sure your gut is repaired in order to make sure that these changes last and are permanent. The other thing too is there is this other layer of toxicity. And I feel like we live in a world right now that we're dealing with kids that are being diagnosed with ADD and ADHD left and right. We're dealing with a huge issue with autism. They say that by 2025 that there's going to be 1 in 50 children with autism. That is a scary, scary statistic. And that's kind of a whole topic in itself, but the important thing is these children are very neurologically compromised. And it's not because fresh out the gate, they're dealing with a very significant emotional trauma or a head injury. It's because of toxicity. And when I say toxicity, there's a lot of avenues that we could be exposed. But we do toxic testing. We do heavy metal testing as an example. And we find major mercury issues in kids that are as young as 2 years old. And these are kids, well, why would they have mercury issues? They're not eating sushi, they're not eating fish, they're not eating those things. They have no fillings in their teeth, but mom had fillings in her teeth. So there are a lot of different things that can be passed from mom to baby from a toxicity standpoint that can actually stress these children's neurological systems very, very early on. So if you have a child who has been born with a variety of these toxins that are already in their system because of what was passed, then you are going to deal with the brain having to rewire. So the way that I explain this to my patients is you have two hemispheres. You have left and right. They have to talk to each other. So when we think of sinuses, we think of sinuses in here. You have sinuses all throughout your head. So the sinus in between is not sealed before the age of 18. So if there are toxins that can pass the blood-brain barrier, they will actually get into this cavern in between the two hemispheres. So what happens is the brain hemisphere to hemisphere, left to right, is trying to talk to each other. And because now there's an obstacle course that is impeding that, now what's going to happen is new pathways have to actually be created. So the brain, all it's trying to do is compensate. So think about it this way. If you think of the concept of the Grand Canyon is going to have wind flow through it in a certain way. It's going to have water flow through it in a certain way. If you dumped a whole bunch of boulders into the Grand Canyon, everything has to reroute and figure out a new way. It's the same exact thing if the left and right hemispheres are trying to talk to each other. So what's going to happen, and especially from an ADD or an autism perspective, autistic children have a tendency to have a lot of issues socially, have a lot of issues with critical thinking, paying attention, eye contact. But then they usually have something they're really, really good at. They're usually a savant in either math or a musical instrument or reading. And that's because of this rerouting of the brain. Certain pathways are suppressed, but then there are other parts of the brain that are being overactivated to compensate. And sometimes those parts of the brain normally wouldn't even be developed until the person is way, way older, but it's being activated at an earlier age. And that's what causes them to be a savant in some type of, again, either some avenue of learning or some type of musical instrument, etc. So the brain is very, very interesting. It's very resilient, but it also will make compensations when needed. So when you're dealing with these compensations, you're going to see good and you're going to see bad. So where does this really all fall in just with what everybody's dealing with? Memory issues, brain fog, they're just not feeling clear. And you don't have to have a traumatic event to have brain fog. You don't have to have, necessarily a massive toxicity to have brain fog. All this is telling you is that there is inflammation that is in the brain that could be provided by a variety of different reasons, but don't take this as this is it for me. I have brain fog. Everybody else has brain fog. Everybody else's memory isn't the best, because we are living in a world right now that Alzheimer's, dementia, this is happening. This is happening to a lot of people. It's happening to our loved ones. You can be 30 years old. I hear it all the time. Oh, well, yeah, I have brain fog, but it is what it is. It's just I'm getting older. And I'm like, you are not getting older. You are 30 years old. If you think that you're just gonna roll over and just deal with it now, you're setting yourself up for a lot of problems later on. So don't just take that as I'm getting older. Deal with the issues now. There are solutions that exist. You can get your brain working optimally. You don't have to accept that your memory is declining. You don't have to accept that you can't think clearly. If you have children, you don't have to accept that they're just going to have ADD and have to be on medication forever. These are things that are fixable. You just need to know the root cause. You need to know if the root cause is emotional. You need to know if the root cause is inflammatory. Is it toxicity? These are all different things that we can evaluate in people. The testing exists. It's just not common practice. So just get outside the box, look at the body in a different way, and know that all of these things can be fixed. So there's my rant. Thank you, Erica. I appreciate that. So again, for those of you that have not watched the video, please check out the video. It goes a lot more in depth, and Dr. Nick is the brain specialist here at IWG. He is the one who heads our neurofeedback and QEEG program. We do have information on our website now, so please check it out for those of you that are really resonating with this topic. And please share this. I work with tons and tons of people, and everyone is foggy. Everyone is foggy. Everyone is dealing with memory issues. Everyone is tired. It's not just you. There are many people that can benefit from this video and just understanding that there are tools out there. Our biggest goal is to just spread the information, because there are people that don't want to be on medication. There's other people that do. And if you want to be on it, great, stay on it. But the other people that are looking to find how they can fix this and find the root cause, that's what IWG does. We are here to give you the answers and help you to resolve it and fix the foundational issues. So, so please spread the word. This is really, really important information. And check out the video and check out our website. I really appreciate you guys being with me tonight. I hope this was really helpful, and I hope to see you soon. Bye, everyone.